was just confused. Since I've been presenting All in the Mind, I've lost count of the number of times we've reported on the woeful inadequacy of some of the treatment and support given to people who experience psychosis. 2 years ago this month, the Schizophrenia Commission concluded that people were being badly let down by a dysfunctional system. Damning stuff. This week, the British Psychological Society is publishing a major report called Understanding Psychosis and Schizophrenia, which gives an overview of what we know now in 2014. We've discussed before the impact of funding cuts on services, but how about the whole approach to psychosis and the way it's viewed by both service users and mental health professionals? I'm joined by Nikki Mattox, an anti-stigma activist with Time to Change, Dr. Laddie Smith, who's a consultant psychiatrist and a member of the Schizophrenia Commission, and by the editor of this week's new report, clinical psychologist Anne Cook. And from our Salford studio, I'm joined by Anthony Scally, the author of Eyebrows and Other Fish. What was it like to receive a diagnosis more than 20 years ago?
I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and I was told I'd be on some sort of medication the rest of my life. My mother was told that I would never be the same again. On a personal note, I've often felt like a square peg in a round hole. I don't hear voices. I'm not sure which diagnostic tick boxes I've ticked, but I don't think a diagnosis of schizophrenia is required to treat somebody that has psychotic events. And they are events, I don't think they're symptoms.
And was there something in particular about that label of being told you had paranoid schizophrenia?
Absolutely. I mean, it's something that needs to be changed because of the connotations. Schizophrenia, if you look at it literally, in the Greek, it's split mind, but that's not what it means. It doesn't mean we're split into two personalities. If that were the case, that would save me on bedroom tax, you know.
Would it have been easier for you if it had been called something different?
If we're going to have a diagnosis of schizophrenia, which is on an umbrella diagnosis, whatever that means, or a spectrum, if we're going to have it, let's call it sunflower syndrome, you know, or something nicer.
Now, Nikki Mattox, you're 17 years old. What's it like for you hearing what Anthony's experience was when he was treated 25 years ago and was told his diagnosis like that?
I can relate to it quite a lot because when you're given this label, it's hard to relate to it, I think, because I always thought, well, I'm a person, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm me. It's just sad that people are treated as mental health problems rather than people.
And what sort of attitudes have you experienced from other people since you've been having help?
I've experienced a lot of stigma and discrimination, especially around the fact that I experience like hearing voices. People have told me that I must be a murderer or I must be being told by these voices I experience to kill children. I just don't understand because I might hear voices, but I'm not a violent person, and it just doesn't change who people are, so yeah.
Anne Cook, we've heard two experiences there of what it's like being given a diagnosis, and in this new report that you're publishing this week, how much does this whole issue of diagnosis feature? I mean, sometimes we hear on the programme from listeners who are relieved to have a diagnosis because it explains what was happening to them for them and it gives them some kind of explanation. Other times, as Anthony's described, it can be stigmatising in itself and listened to by the staff that you've seen.
Sometimes people they want to give you a label because it's easier to deal with that way. They'll just give you a label, put you on some medication, and then they just hope it goes away. But it never does until you deal with the actual cause of it, until you talk about how you feel. That's how it gets better. If you've got a label of something, then they tend to think, oh, well, this is why you're experiencing. But people get misdiagnosed all the time. I mean, I've had so many different labels chucked about, and I've just given up on listening to them now because I'm just myself and I experience what I do. And I don't really care about the labels that I get, really.
And do you get listened to in terms of what kind of treatment you prefer to have?
No. When it comes to the hearing voices, I've never really had much treatment around it. All I've had for that is just been given some medication and drugs and said, out of 10, how much has the voices gone since she's taken this? If not, then let's try another drug. Then all I really wanted was to talk about it and say how it made me feel, what I was experiencing, but I never got that because all professionals did for me personally is just give me some drugs because they hoped that would sort it, but it never did and it still hasn't.
And are the voices the thing that distresses you most?
Yeah, out of all aspects of the illness over the past few years or whatever, the voices have thing that scared me the most and that thing I find most difficult to deal with, but it's the thing that I've never been able to talk about or go into detail about because they just hope drugs will sort it, but they never do.
I mean, Laddie, your unit was shortlisted for the psychiatric or about treatments that would make things easier for you. What would you change, Anthony?
It's just this word schizophrenia and who we represent and what it represents and who represents us. Even White Landman doesn't represent me. He probably despises me.
And Nikki, what one thing would you change?
I would say I'd really hope that people would be listened to earlier because in my experience and a lot of people I know's experience, people aren't listened to until it's classed as severe enough, and then people just get worse and worse and reach crisis when it could have been prevented. So if I could change anything, I'd hope that people could be listened to before it reaches crisis.